Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. Okay, how's everyone's energy level? Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. So I want to know how much energy I should put into my talk here, especially for those in the back that are listening and are going to come forward. This is going to be a good talk, so you should probably do that. But I'm going to cheat. I'm going to ask you a question, which is, if I do a really good job here today and I talk to you about things that are going to change the way that you communicate at your companies forever and brings distraction-free environments and just more focused work, and it's going to change the way that you communicate, how excited would you be and how big of an applause would I get if I do that? Just give me a preview. Okay, so that's exciting. Okay, cool. Well, let's get started. So what are we talking about today? It's called the art of batch communication, how to fight interruptions, notifications, fuel asynchronous meetings, and create more focus time for everyone. So who am I? My name is Aydin Mirzaee. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Fellow.app. We make meeting productivity software to help you have fewer, better meetings. And I'm also the host, it's not on the slides, but I'm also the host of the Super Managers podcast, where we're actually releasing episode 100 this week. So I've been doing that for a while and been talking to a lot of founders, executives at companies everywhere. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, 3 different companies, 5 different products, tens of millions in sales. I've been through an acquisition, and then saw the path to an IPO with the company that acquired us. And the thing that has really basically occupied my time and my attention over all these years is how can I get more leverage? How can I make more use of the time that I have? How can I do more with less? And this is something that I've been focused on for the last 20 years. And this talk is about one of the key realizations that I've had that has made all of the difference. So we all are very familiar with this constant interruptions that we get all the time. The most powerful and the most valuable thing that we have at our disposal is our focus time. To the extent that we can focus and get focus time, that is the most valuable thing that we have. But unfortunately, the one thing that everybody tries to take away from us is our focus time. And so we live in this world of constant interruption. And if you remember back when it used to be the norm to be at work at the office, what was really interesting is that you would be sitting at your desk and any random person could come and approach you. They could do the famous shoulder tap and can I talk to you for a few minutes? And the problem was you didn't know what kind of a conversation that was or how long it would be. Maybe it's a 2-minute chat, maybe it's a 20-minute discussion. And the problem is that in advance you didn't actually know. Some people had the luxury of a private office, so they could go and they could hide out in their private office. Other people would, put on their hoodies and put on their noise-canceling headphones and look super focused, hoping that nobody would notice them and that nobody would bug them. How many people have done that in the audience? A few people I see. Yeah, so that used to be kind of the status quo. And then we used to joke about, hey, I'm going to take a work from home Wednesday so I can actually get some work done. And that used to be a joke, but the fact of the matter is that the distractions that existed have always plagued us. And there's a lot of studies that have been done, but this is one of the most often cited ones from the University of California in Irvine. And the study says that if you get distracted, it can take you up to 25 minutes to get back to the task at hand. 25 minutes is a long time because if you imagine, 3 interruptions a day, so now you've got an hour and a half, and you do that every day for a full week, and now all of a sudden you've lost an entire day of productivity in that 1 week. So this is really, really serious stuff. So then what happened? Then obviously everybody clued in that remote work is amazing, but the problem is that the distractions followed us there too. So now we've got text messages, Slack messages, phone calls. So the distractions are still ever present. So what do we do? And so this is an interesting thing. I was chatting with Liam, who's a friend, and obviously organizer of the conference. And I said, Liam is amazing. And he was into remote work before it was cool, and I thought he was a crazy person, and eventually the whole world followed him, so he's a smart man. But I asked him, what do you do at Time Doctor? How do you manage this stuff? And he said, well, we do a few things, but one of which is we encourage people to shut off their notifications. And so, you basically shut off your notifications and you check your messaging platforms like you check email a few times a day, and that's that. And while that is better than doing nothing, I think that's progress. It does have its own set of challenges. The first is you log into Slack at your designated time, and the problem is you don't know what you're going to be exposed to, right? You could start, and before you know it, you're into all of these conversations, and you thought it was going to be 5 minutes, and now it's an hour and a half later, and you're like, where did my time go? That is what I call the vortex of communication. It kind of sucks you in, and then before you know it, all this time has passed. The other thing is it's really hard to prioritize communications. Where should you spend your time? Should you spend 5 minutes with this chat or 10 minutes here? It's really, really hard to prioritize. And of course, as we've talked about earlier today, some things are just not great via a text conversation. Sometimes you need high bandwidth communication, and you can think about things like a one-on-one meeting, a brainstorming session, debating a hotly contested issue. These are some things that actually benefit from higher bandwidth communication. And then, of course, if you do shut off all of your notifications, well, notifications can be useful at times. And if you shut them off, then the rare time that you actually need to talk to someone, well, that opportunity is now also gone. So I know I'm backing us into a corner here because you're thinking, well, then what should we do? We're screwed. And so there has to be a better way. And so this is what I've really been focusing on for really most of my career, is to figure out how can there be a better way. And who's read this book, The Effective Executive? That's it. That is a very small minority. You don't know what you are missing out on. Great book. Drucker, obviously, in the world of management, he is like the it person. He wrote this book called The Effective Executive. Let me read you this quote, which says, "The effective executive therefore knows that he has to consolidate his discretionary time. He knows that he needs large chunks of time and that small driblets are no time at all." This is a really important concept, right? Very, very basic, which is if you can consolidate activities into time blocks, that unlocks a huge amount of leverage. Anytime you can consolidate activity, or the way I like to put it is anytime you batch your activity, that is going to unlock a large amount of leverage. And so this is something that we intuitively know, right? So think about the average trip that you take to the grocery store. There's a few ways that you could do your grocery shopping. So one is every time you think of something you want to buy, you could drop everything and then just get in your car and drive to the grocery store, buy that item, and then go back home. You could do that. But then you'd be making all these trips throughout the week, and it's just going to be annoying. You're going to spend so much time, and it's not efficient. But if you had a list, and every time you thought about something that you wanted to buy, you put it on the list. Every time someone told you, hey, we're missing something, you put it on the list. Then eventually you'd have this great list. And then at your allotted time for grocery shopping, that consolidated time that you've put, say it's Thursday at 7 p.m., I don't know when people go grocery shopping. Marielle, when do you go grocery shopping? Sunday morning, there you go. So if it's Sunday morning, then you basically walk into the grocery store with your list, you get all the items, you get in, you get out. It's super efficient. And what's nice about that is you also don't forget things, right? So you don't go back home and say, oh shoot, the main thing that I wanted to buy for my Sunday night dinner, I forgot to buy, so now I have to go back. So this intuitively makes sense for us, and I can tell you it's a lot better than walking into the grocery store and saying, I wonder what I should buy without a plan, right? So this concept of consolidating activities is something that we intuitively know. Another one of my favorite books, who's read Getting Things Done? I mean, this must be, okay, perfect. A lot more hands this time. So David Allen, so this is important because it just talks to the broader your responsibilities, the more senior you get, the more getting things done will rely on communicating and transacting with other people. So this is a fact. The more senior you get within an organization, the more you're going to rely on communicating. So maybe when you're a junior database administrator and you join a company, you can kind of get away with communicating with less people. The more senior you get, the more this becomes part of your job. So this is a very, very important activity. And so what we're learning is that the more senior we get, we're going to have to do a lot more of it too. So what do we do? So David talks about this concept called the agenda list. And the agenda list is very, very similar to the grocery list that I talked about. But imagine that you're a manager and you have 7 direct reports. And so what you do is you basically create, I mean, you could use anything for this, but say you have a notebook, you have 7 pages, 1 page for each direct report. And you put the name of each person on those pages. And what you do is every time you think about something that you want to communicate with that person, you have 2 options. You can drop everything and go communicate with that person, or what you could do is you could reserve and you put it on that list. And so what you're doing is you're actually starting to build an agenda with each and every person, just like you were building that grocery list. You're doing that with each person so you can batch the activity of communicating with that person rather than spreading it throughout the week so that you can keep it to a allotted time slot. So that is the concept of what an agenda list is. David Allen talks about it in his book. And the beautiful thing about this is, by the way, you can use it with everybody. It doesn't have to be only with the people at your work. I personally use this with my wife. I use it with friends that I have that I don't see all the time. And so this concept can be applied to everywhere. And of course, you can use it for group lists too. So if you have your staff, if you have your executive staff team, if you have a project sync that you're working on, you could take the same concept and actually apply it to all of those different items. But here's the beautiful thing. So let's say you follow along and you start doing this thing. So when you think about something, rather than dropping everything and starting to communicate, you actually write it down and you save it for later. What happens? You go to sleep, and then the next day you wake up and you realize, this thing I wanted to talk about with Tuan, it doesn't seem that important anymore. I could just cross it out. So I just saved myself from talking with Tuan about this. Or this other thing, I actually figured it out. So it turns out I don't need to talk to them anyway. Or I have a whole bunch of things now that I want to talk about, and I have the opportunity to prioritize them. Turns out really there's 9 things I can talk about with this person. But frankly, the only thing that matters, the most important thing is this item here. I could actually prioritize that and mainly talk about that. So magic happens once there is time delay between the point of ideation of what you're communicating to the point that you actually do the communicating. And so the other concept, so what happens if you start doing this? Well, first of all, 2 things. One is that you're going to spend less time communicating, because a lot of things that are not important won't be communicated. You're going to put first things first and spend most of the time on those things, and you're going to spend less time multitasking. Because let's get back to the original thing I said. Every time you drop everything to do something else, you're going to spend 25 minutes getting back to the task at hand. So if this method of communicating can reduce the amount of time that you multitask and move from one task to the other, this starts to really compound and make a huge difference. So one of the things that I often get asked is, Aydin, this is great. I love this. I love that you are now getting me to communicate in a different way. I can see how this can be very impactful. But the problem, I'm not the problem here, right? My problem is everybody in my company, they always want to, they're always interrupting me. So what do I do with everyone else being the problem? And so, the question is, how do we get everybody to do this? And getting everybody to do anything is very challenging. But don't be dismayed. I do have some suggestions. So the first of all, the only thing you can really, truly control fully is a person called yourself. And so the best way to start is obviously with yourself. And so this is how it goes. You start creating this list. Say that you want to talk with someone. Again, I'm going to use Tuan as an example just because he's sitting right there. But I want to talk with Tuan. And then the next time I meet with Tuan, I say, hey, Tuan, here are all the things that I want to chat about. And I think that these are the most important items that I should chat about first. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? And then we can actually collaborate. Before we actually engage in the act of communicating, we are collaborating and setting out the plan so that we could do that together. And he might say, you know what, like, no, this other item is more important. And then I might say, and do you have anything to add to this list? And then that kind of subtly encourages him that he should also come prepared with a list the next time around. I guarantee you, you do this, you're going to be, you're going to look so professional and organized. It's just going to, like, it kind of up-levels the level of seriousness that you bring into the organization. The other thing, and this is perhaps the most important one, the next time someone reaches out to you and says, hey, I want to talk to you about this particular thing, and you're really busy in deep work doing something, what you do is not respond to them, but instead what you say is, hey, this sounds really important, and it sounds like we should probably dedicate some time to it. So how about I see we're meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. anyway, how about we just take that, and why don't we dedicate some time to it tomorrow? So what you're doing is you're subtly encouraging this concept of not just randomly communicating all the time, but batching that communication and setting it to a particular point in time. So when do you use these things? So say you follow my approach, and now you have an agenda list for the people you frequently communicate with groups, and you know, the answer that we've been saying is this concept of meetings. And so this is a really important point, because with a lot of the people that you frequently communicate with, you probably already have recurring slots. You probably have recurring slots with your direct reports. And so what we're saying is what you do is you take the same agenda list and you actually use it for the slots that you already have. And this is an important point, because how many times have you been to a meeting and you haven't had much to talk about, and you're kind of there because it's in the calendar? You know, part of this is because you're communicating throughout the week, interrupting everyone all the time, and then when it's the time when you're actually supposed to communicate, you have nothing to talk about because you've been grocery shopping every single day of the week, right? So this concept, the fact that we communicate in this interrupt-driven mode actually makes our meetings worse. And it makes us even hate them more because we're just doing things all over the map. But the idea is if you consolidate that communication activity, it actually is super transformative. So one thing you might be asking is, okay, Aydin, I love this concept. I see it can make a huge difference for me. So if I start using agenda lists and only communicate at allocated time slots, what happens? Are you saying that we should get rid of Slack? And the answer is no, because I love Slack and I love text messages. But I understand something very important, which is these different modes of communication require a different types of tools. So I broke this out, and without going into too much detail, but there's an urgent and non-urgent, long discussion and short discussion. So to simplify it, if something is not urgent, it can go on your agenda list. 100% without thinking about it, if it's not urgent, it can go there. But then you might say, Aydin, you said this was a revolutionary talk that's going to change my company. Are you saying we can only apply it for half of all communications? And the answer is no, you can actually apply it for a lot more, because it turns out, and if you agree with this, can I hear a round of applause, that most communications are actually not urgent. Do you agree with that notion? There you go. Okay, so 90% of your communications can actually go onto this agenda list. So then you might say, okay, if we're putting everything on the agenda list, I mean, is there anything that doesn't belong there? And the answer is that if something goes on an agenda list, there's this preconceived notion that you have to talk about it. And not everything requires discussion. Some things are very much FYIs. So for example, we hired Cynthia, and she's going to lead this department. Maybe that's just an FYI. Maybe the other person just needs to know that. And what you can do with your agenda list, and this is a hack that is also going to be very impactful, is I have an example agenda. I don't know if you can see it easily, but you can create an FYI section all the way at the bottom. And what you do is all the things that don't require discussion, this is your asynchronous section. You just put it down there. And you can have your synchronous meeting or connect and talk about things that actually need to be talked about. Everything else can just be read and consumed. So you can actually get a large portion of your meeting to actually be consumed completely asynchronously, thereby allowing you to shorten those things as well. So if there was ever a slide that you took a picture of at this conference, I think it should be this. So I'm going to wait for the phones to come out. See a few phones back there. This is something that we live by at Fellow, which is no agenda, no attenda. It is like the most important motto, and it makes sense. An agenda is a plan for your conversation. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you cannot do any of these things unless you believe in this core motto. And the key here is, and if anyone's seen Glengarry Glen Ross, one of my favorite movies, and in that movie, it's always be closing. I believe in the concept of always be populating your agendas. This is a really, really important point, and let me emphasize why. Most meetings don't have agendas, but to the extent that they do, those agendas are created how many minutes before the meeting? 5, 10, maybe 15? Here's the problem with that. You walk into the meeting feeling all good that you've walked into it with an agenda, and once the meeting is over, you realize, oh shoot, the most important thing that I wanted to talk about, I forgot to talk about it. And then that creates back and forth afterwards. But when you're always populating an agenda, when you're doing this throughout the week in real time, just like you were doing that grocery list, what happens is we work the way that our mind works. And our mind is giving us ideas and thoughts throughout the week as we're being exposed to various stimuli. And so if you actually do this in this format and you're always populating those agendas, it's going to give you a lot more leverage and it's going to function a lot better. So another thing that you can do is you can actually do this in a collaborative way. So one of the other tricks in trying to get everybody in your company to follow the art of batched communication is you can actually use a collaborative tool to do this. Few benefits to this, but I'll tell you my favorite one. Not everybody is really good at walking into a conversation and having their best thoughts on the spot as soon as they understand what you're talking about. Some people, like myself, are synthesizers, and so we require to get information, and then I'll sleep on it, and then the next day I will have really coherent, excellent, hopefully excellent, ideas and thoughts about it, but I can't do it on the fly. And if you start to do this, if you start to have these collaborative agenda lists, what will happen is that other people can consume this information, and before they walk into a conversation, they're going to be able to have time to let that simmer in their minds, and this will just create a lot more inclusive environment and really allow everybody to communicate at their best. And of course, you can prioritize things together, and there's many other benefits, but that's the one I wanted to highlight. So the other question becomes, well, okay, so if we start doing this, how often should we meet, or should we meet at all? The beautiful thing about this is now you have, like, think of these agenda lists as your communication. You've heard of tech debt. Think of it as communication debt. If you have a lot of communication debt, then maybe this is a 45-minute synchronized talking time. If there's not a lot, then maybe it's 15 minutes. But the way that I like to handle it is I like to cap my communication activity. So for example, if I know I have a 30-minute slot to talk with a particular person on my team, I love the idea of saying it's 30 minutes and that's it. Because what that forces us to do is to say, hey, we're going to talk about the most important thing. We're going to put first things first and talk about those. And everything else, it can either wait for next time or it can be consumed asynchronously. And so this is a beautiful way of saying, how can I cap my communication activity? And this is something that allows for that. And of course, if you do this, I talked about the asynchronous section in your agenda list where you just consume and don't talk about things. But what you'll find is, and I see this all the time, that a lot more of your meetings are going to become asynchronous. Sometimes you might replace the entire thing with an asynchronous meeting, but certainly you're going to keep the synchronous discussion for the most important topics, and everything else becomes asynchronous. So it really helps you power that too. So I am coming up on time here. So to conclude, what is the big idea here? The big idea is the art of batched communication. It's the idea that consolidating your activities is an unlocker of productivity. It creates leverage. The idea is you take the act of communicating with the different people on your team, and rather than in dribs and drabs, you consolidate that activity and you do it in allotted time slots. And the way that you can do this is it's a 3-step process. You create an agenda list for each and every person that you communicate with frequently. When people interrupt you in the middle of your deep work, you say, hey, this sounds really important. We're meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. anyway. Can we put this on the list? And finally, if you really want to leverage this and get everybody in your company to do it, do it in a collaborative agenda list format, prioritize things, talk about the most important things. And if you can do these things, what will happen is you will change your company from an interrupt-driven, distraction-full environment to a place where there's true focus time, true flow state communication, and it's going to change everything. It will actually change the communication culture of your whole company. So that's it for me. What I've done is I've also created QR codes. So if you want to get the summary of these notes and share it with other people in your company, here's a link that you can take a picture of. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the art of batched communication. Thank you.